Good.
Good
Uh,
afternoon, friends near and far. Welcome back to the second of currently scheduled two conversations with Mr. Keith Weigel, friend of the United Church of Christ, Eden United Church of Christ community, longtime member and ally. And so we look forward to recapping a bit on what we did in session one last week on our informational session about the Volga German immigrants who not only founded our church, but other neighboring churches and influenced and impacted the Jefferson Park neighborhood so significantly. We're so thankful, Keith, to be with you a second time, and I want to turn it to you to offer a chance for your recap, refresh us to whatever degree you feel is needed, and look forward to conversation together. Keith?
okay. Thank you, Jackie. My name is Keith Weigel, and I guess I'm in a unique position to talk about both the German Russians, because both my dad's parents, my grandparents, were Volga Germans from the village of Schwede. Uh, they were founding members, a founding family of Eden Church. And so my history goes back to with Eden Church for a long time. Um, I was baptized there, so that's 76 years of history there. Um, my dad grew up within the church, and so there's a great affection for Eden Church.
Mm.
I started last week with a very brief history of the German Russians, um, which I'm not going to go into today. But I wanted to start with the migration from Russia to other places in the world. Uh, and that really started with the taking away of rights
Mm.
that were given to the settlers of Russia in the 1760s. And the biggest one that caused a lot of concern was the military service. Most of the settlers came from a very war-torn Germany, and so that was a um, very important uh, freedom that they were given in Russia. Also, the religion, they now started to, I call it, being forced into the Russian family, both in religion and language. So in the 1870s, they started exploring where they could go if there were better places. The first settlers in the United States were generally in the 1880s, and they settled mostly in the farm fields, areas of Kansas, Washington, and Western Canada. Um, and the migration to Chicago really started about 1910, the early 1900s, and went through the early 1920s, which at that time the Russian Revolution was over, and so Russia started tightening their borders, and it made it a lot more difficult to leave Russia. Um, I also talked about the churches that the German Russians were affiliated with. I talked about the churches that were really kind of organized and started as German Russian churches. I started with um, Pastor Johannes Block, who started St. John's Lutheran Church. And he was the only pastor of that church. But he was instrumental in helping German Russians get to the Chicago area. I also talked about Calvary, which I don't know, is it a Methodist church now yet?
Yes, it is. It is still a Methodist church, that being one of the denominations formed by mergers, just as
Right,
United Church of Christ was earlier in the 20th century.
right. And then our own Eden Church, which uh, was founded. And all these churches were organized about in the early 19 teens, Eden 1914. St. John's was 1914. I don't know exactly when Calvary started. I also talked about a couple churches that were, I'll call it predominantly German churches. Another St. John's Lutheran Church that's on the northwest side of Chicago, and St. Alphonse, which is the Roman Catholic Church on Lincoln Avenue, I believe, which was in the heart of, I'll call it the German area of Lincoln Avenue.
Mm-hmm.
I also talked about the Brotherhood, the German Brotherhood, and that was some good conversation that we had. And again, Jackie, I was able to find a short history of the German Brotherhood, which I'll send you a copy in a few days.
Yeah, very, very, very grateful for that.
Okay. Today, I really want to talk about the kind of the people, unsere Leute, I said, are people who were involved in everyday life in the mostly Jefferson Park area. Um, while Jackie, if you want to bring up the slides, if you,
Here we
okay,
go. This is the part 3 deck.
okay, keep on going because this.
Yep.
I guess we may, if that's the end of it, we may need to start with the next one.
Very good. I'll just switch that out 1 second.
Okay.
I did think of a question to ask as we were thinking about those conditions in Russia that were of benefits, the benefits that they were offered in the mid 18th century. I was curious, do you know if there was particular religious sentiment underneath the desire to be granted exemption from military service, or was it maybe a kind of more generally human experience of the fatigue from the war, the wars of previous many decades in Europe?
Well, it was kind of a combination of both from a military service perspective. Um, in the 1700s, in the 1750s, they were just ending several years of war in Germany. And so that was a very important factor to them. It was also a religious factor. There was a good population, if you may, of Mennonites, who I believe the military service was more of a religious item to them.
For sure. Yeah.
So, it really was kind of a combination of both.
Yeah, thanks for that. And having, driving home that reality of the ecumenical nature of those immigrations to Russia and then here, right? That was multifaceted religiously.
Yes.
Great.
I mean,
I have your slide deck available here, and I'll be glad to be going through.
This portion of the presentation, I wanted to talk to about the people of German Russian people, and really with pictures and stories. So I'll add my own 2 cents to the slides that I presented. But I wanted to emphasize that Jefferson Park was a very close-knit neighborhood. I I knew it as a kid and growing up, but when I started researching my family and looking at census records, if I looked at just the block between Eden Church and Calvary Church, I would estimate that 75% of the families in that block were German Russian in the 1920 to 1930 time frame. And the people helped each other. When a new family would come in, generally they would know other families, and they would help them with lodging, uh, getting jobs, just getting situated in in the area. And I've put a few slides together. I know I've missed many people, but these are the information I had. The first slide here is the building in the background, actually, and this is what's the park on Milwaukee Avenue? Is that
Jefferson Park is on the west side of
yeah,
Milwaukee. Yeah, just a
yeah.
bit west.
That is I believe the park that the two young children are sitting in. But the building in back of it was an apartment building that was called the Russian Hotel, because a lot of the immigrants that came here, that was their first place that they lived. They got an apartment there. And so for a number of years, it was predominantly German Russian. We go to the next slide. As I said, they helped each other. This picture was actually a picture of the cooks that helped with a wedding, and I don't know the name. I have it someplace, but it was an altar-got wedding, and the ladies of the churches would get together and prepare prepare the food, get the food served. This is an interesting slide. My grandmother is in here, and I know Jean Schnarr, not only we share a grandmother, but another grandmother from its other side is also in here.
Oh, wow.
So
which ones are those two?
Well, I don't know his, but let's see. The fourth lady in, I don't know, the right side is my grandmother.
And so that's Maria?
Yeah, Maria Weigel. Her maiden name was Kramer. So Jim, you know any of these people?
The lady standing up might be one of my wife's relatives. That looks like a reamer of some kind.
Okay, so you're related to the Reamers also?
My wife is on her mom's side.
Okay. Good. I know a few Reamers. Okay, but after, when I got married, my Aunt Mealy, Jean's mother, told me, the story of the cooks, and helping. And then as the ceremony ended, and I call them cooks, got some recognition, they would kind of dance around through the crowd, the audience, with pots and pans and making noises. Just a recognition of kind of the effort that they went to help the celebration.
Wow. And so do you think, Keith, that was a wedding that was here in our facilities?
No.
Not necessarily?
There was a Volga insurance company that had a hall that was around Pulaski and Foster, and a lot of weddings. Oh, Jerry Funk. Okay. A lot of weddings took place there, and it was at that location. Now, this was early.
Can you hear anything?
Hi there,
It's like-
welcome. We're so glad
Can you hear
with-
anything?
Hello, can you hear us?
That's what I asked. Can you hear anything?
Yes, we can hear you.
Very good. Yep. Well, welcome, participants. Keith started just a few moments ago, and we're welcoming Jerry and
Judy,
Judy. Very good. So glad to be with you, and we'll have plenty of time for discussion and question and answer as we proceed. Keith?
Yeah. Hi, Jerry, Judy. We
Hi.
can't see you. Your video either isn't on or
we're in a parking lot in southern Illinois. We just pulled over.
okay. Well,
said,
welcome. Okay, we talked about the folks. If we want to go to the next slide, well,
Very good.
oh, another fun. Okay.
It's Judy and Jerry Funk. We're both
Okay.
on
Okay.
one on
hello.
each phone.
Okay.
In your car.
Okay.
This, again, as I said, that it was
You did
very
fine.
close.
Wish you would have put it on.
I'm sorry. Okay. And the families helped each other. In the early 20s, when a person had been here for a while and they kind of wanted to start a life and bought a lot and wanted to build a house, a lot of the labor was done pretty much for free, on the weekends. A lot of the early German Russians were in construction, so they would, when a family got the money together, they would essentially build the house for them. And this is, here you go on Argyle, just, building a house.
Yeah.
Again, I have a slide that has most of these people's name. I don't have them all. So, and here is, I love this, the horses on this one. This is actually Gene Schnarr's grandfather, Fritz Frederick Schnarr, and I believe he delivered brick from the old brickyard that was on the northwest side, and going back into the days of horse and buggy. So this is probably early 20s in Chicago. Okay. For those growing up in Jefferson Park, Cowie Cole was I believe he was a politician, but he also, delivered coal. I call this the Russian hillbillies because this was actually a picture when my parents, when we moved from Chicago to Wheaton, Illinois, in 1951, I believe it was. And these are the man standing there is my uncle, Henry Eschenbrenner. And I believe the young man on the fender of the car is Don Hoppy. And I'm not sure who exactly that is in the cab of the car. It might be one of the Eschenbrenners. It might be Gene. I'm not sure.
Yeah.
But we loaded up the truck and we moved to Wheaton, Illinois.
Well, and for those who are on today or maybe picking up the recording, I would just lift a witness that Don Hoppy, was a lifelong member, and because his family was not one that moved out to the suburbs, he was able to be here and in our care until he passed in the summer of 2020. So a pastor's delight to think of one of my elders and seeing them at this age. And so would you say, Keith, just a question pops in for me, when you think about the trades that were a part, the priority trades that were a part of the skills and capacities of these early immigrants, would they be mostly in the physical, like you were talking about, coal, brick, construction? What would be kind of the gamut of professions at that time?
Well, a lot were in the trades. They got a lot of, they got into concrete work because in the 20s, the teens and 20s, Chicago was growing like crazy. And so they got into a lot of concrete work, whether it was, foundations and stuff like that, sidewalks. I mean, I remember going around Jefferson Park, and a lot of the sidewalks were stamped with, like a construction stamp. And
Oh, yeah.
I remember seeing DeGraff cement and Steigerwald. I can't remember some others, but a lot of them were in the trades. There were also they did get into, I'll call it manufacturing. There was a silk manufacturing place that dealt with silk. I don't know if they actually wove the silk or made stuff from silk, but a number of people, that was I'll call it a first job they got. And then as they got kind of settled, a lot of them became small entrepreneurs in haulage, in trucking, in construction. I know the next slide is the same move, but this was the Steigerwald truck. And again, that's my uncle Henry, or Farmer Hoppy, on the back of it. And, this is a very close area that, they were able to borrow trucks, or, borrow from people who had established themselves, in order to make moves like this.
Yeah, it is an interesting sort of illustration that maybe would be good in our day and generation to be mindful of the necessity of both initiative and social safety net.
Yeah.
And
social safety net was a big thing. A lot of the immigrants came in the 19 teens, and of course then the depression hit in the late 1930s, and that's when they really needed a safety net. Oh,
yeah, beautiful.
I do like the old washing machine on the back of the truck. Okay.
Jim, Jerry, or Judy, any questions on these themes of work before we move on?
No, friends of mine growing up who were cavalry members, the Fritz, Carl and Tommy Fritz, worked for their grandfather, who was also a cavalry founding member. And they were contractors, as far as I know, their whole lives. And they built, the grandfather helped build the parsonage for a cavalry church down in Ainsley and Laverne.
Okay.
Wow. Noemi will be glad to hear that story. Pastor Noemi was with us last week, unable to be with us for the whole hour this week, and she's the current resident of that parsonage.
So it has some history.
Yeah.
Jim, was that related to the Fritz family?
Yes. I know there's a couple Fritzes around, but that was, the father died young, and I know the mother was around, their mom was around, but I didn't remember the father too much. But I do know Chris. That's a friend of my in-laws.
Well, this gentleman here is my uncle. Again, Henry, we called him Henny. Christ, and he lived, on Strong Street, right next to the railroad tracks. But I knew he drove a dump truck all his life, but the story I have here is that he would go to breweries and remove the cinders from the furnaces that they used to heat the beer and stuff. And he had a side yard, and he would dump the cinders in the yard. And then when somebody was building a house or something and they needed fill, he would load up his truck and deliver. But I also have a picture of my dad in there helping Henny load up the truck.
He's a little thinner there than I remember him as a kid. He got a little thicker when he got older.
Well, aren't we all?
Yeah, that's true.
I don't have the list of founders right handy here, but am I right that Christ would have been one of the family names of the charter members, or around early, at least early in the years?
Yeah, he was early. I don't remember if he was the founding family, but they were, very early members.
That house you talk about, that where Henry Christ and his wife lived.
Yeah.
My brother-in-law ended up buying that property and remodeling that house and lived there for a good 10 years before they sold it and moved to the suburbs.
Yeah, that was, my aunt Emma Christ, was his wife. So she was a Weagle, and that's how I got an uncle.
Oh, beautiful. I'm nearly 100% sure that maybe one of Emma Christ's recipes is in the cookbook that's being released this weekend.
Okay, good. If you grew up in Jeff, Gotchi's store, there was a couple places on Lawrence, but whenever we got together as a group, we always had the sausage, and we called it Gotchi's Killer. I don't know what it went by, but many a family get together. We had a big roasting pan of German sausage from Gotchi's. So
that was where my folks used to send me for milk.
Pardon?
It was Gotchi's store on Lawrence Avenue and the Laverne, right?
Yeah, right there.
My folks used to say Pete Cadola's Dance Hall. I know that name. Yep.
But here's Pete Cadola. And just on the other side of, what is it, Laverne there?
Yeah.
He had a shop, I'll call it. It evolved over years. This is this advertisement, and this actually came, I believe, from the 35th anniversary book from Eden Church.
Yeah.
But it was ice cream parlor, but it was also, a dance hall, a saloon, a tavern. So it evolved over the years, different places. I don't know if it's still open. I know the building was there the last time I drove by, but
would it have been right on the corner?
I think it was one in.
One in, yeah.
One in from the corner, because I think the building on the corner was torn down.
Yeah, it was rebuilt. It was rebuilt somewhat recently. Yeah.
Yeah.
I think those might be condos now, because it was right next door to a lumber yard.
Oh, right. This is the north side of Lawrence. It is.
Yeah,
condos.
the north side.
Yeah.
Miller Lumber Yard was down closer to the railroad track.
Okay, there was.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then Cadola, was that a Volga German name?
I don't believe so.
I hadn't heard that one.
I actually believe the front of the building has a something Czech. So I don't believe he was Volga German.
Oh, I was just there 2 hours ago.
Well, John B. May, the funeral home, a lot of German Russians had their memorials or whatever the funerals through John B. May.
Yeah.
You know, I went as a kid, I got dragged along to a number of them, and you know, my dad would spend hours talking to all the people who he knew growing up and stuff. One of the benefits, the Northern Illinois chapter of the American Historical Society, Germans, Russia, they actually did an extraction of the deaths at John B. May, and there's about 1,500 deaths that were extracted, and it's a really good source of information on the German Russians, because sometimes it gives a little history, who their spouse was, maybe some family members, maybe where they lived, sometimes also a little bit about their home village might be listed also. So it's a very interesting extraction.
Of course, I've often heard Eden folks remember the time at which, and I believe this is when the sanctuary was being built, that there was a period of some extended time that they worshiped at the funeral home, you know?
Yes, they did. I have heard that. Hadn't mentioned that, but yeah, I believe when they were building the current church. Yeah. So there was a very, and now I've got a couple family slides, and of course this is my family. My grandfather David Weigel, my grandmother Marie Kramer Weigel, my uncle Dave Weigel, my Aunt Mary Hoppy on the young girl on there, and then the baby that my grandpa's holding is Emma Weigel, who became Emma Christ. So Emma was the first one born in the United States. Dave and Mary were born in Russia, and they came over in 1911. So this is kind of like from the 1912, 13 era it was taken in the United States.
And do you know, Keith, if this was them already in Chicago, or
yes,
they came directly to Chicago?
They came basically directly to Chicago. So this would have been in Chicago. I don't know where the photograph was taken. You know, when I was putting this this presentation together, I presented this at one of the conferences of AHSGR, and one of the Steigerwalds provided me with some information, and I believe the gentleman in the overcoat was the came over, and it's interesting to see that that's a uniform, and I believe that's a Russian uniform. A lot of the Germans before they came fought in the Russian-Japanese War in the early 1900s.
Wow.
And they then they came over after they did their service. So I don't know.
This would have been people still there in Russia who either it was the case that their family and religious tradition weren't as fervently opposed to service, or they just got conscripted and had to serve.
Well, they got conscripted and they had to serve. And usually it was for, you know, a number of years. My grandfather was in the service, but he didn't see fighting. He was basically he worked in an office as an interpreter because he spoke several languages.
Mhm.
This Steiger looks like he was an officer.
Well,
'Cause
he
he's
was
a dress
something
sergeant.
more important than
Yeah, he was not just an enlisted man.
now. And if you look at the medals, I can't see those, but the cross there is um, a fairly important um, war medal. So I believe he saw some service.
Mm.
And I don't know if this photo was taken in the States or if that was in Russia. I don't know.
Mhm. Well, this is a wondering I've often held. I mean, every immigrant generation, whether they're refugees or immigrants, carries naturally complex emotions about what drew them to the new place, what drove them from the old place. We're complex spiritual social creatures. I've always I've always wondered, and I don't hear people of your generation or a bit older talking about this, often, like what it was like, say in the late teens, the 20s, the 30s here for German immigrants who had come from Russia, like as it relates to the geopolitics of the time and awful and tragic turn in Germany where families had not lived for many, many decades or more than a century or two, and yet the human being kind of constituted toward, ethnic and national loyalties, right?
Yeah.
And also how how people identified with the Russian social and cultural and political developments, like of the early 20th century.
Yeah.
So just so glad I left that behind. Was there Were there heartstrings that got talked about publicly, or maybe because they were just such private people, those things were matters held close to the chest?
Well, I think a lot of it was held close to the vest. I only remember a couple times when my grandpa talked about Russia. And it was more of the farming life that he talked about
Yeah.
there. I do know at one point he wanted to go back to Russia.
Mm.
And there were a number of people who went back. But I'm
Mm.
glad he didn't.
Mhm.
Um, what else was I going to say? You brought up something I was going. Oh, a lot of the German Russians had more of an association with Russian than with German.
Mhm.
Um, I know it at St. John's Church on Montrose. Some people, the Schnars went there, and through work, I knew a family that went to St. John's, and so I asked, "Well, did you know anybody?" And it came back, "Oh, those dirty Russians," So, a lot of it was more Russian association, even though they spoke German.
Mhm. And that's natural after spending, a century or a century and a half,
Right.
in a place. That's what in our complex way as humans, that's what we would hope for, right?
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Jim, others, do you have anything to add or ask here as we pause a moment?
No, it's a transitional time in the United States because, you're talking about World War One, and a lot of Americans fought against the Germans in World War One.
Yes.
And there could have been some hard feelings after 104,000 Americans die over there in trench warfare, and they're able to bring the Spanish flu back with them. So there were probably a few hard feelings among non-German Americans about
Yeah.
this. So yeah, I would say people would play it close to the vest, not
Yeah.
talk too much.
Yeah.
Yeah, I wasn't thinking about that specifically today, but thank you for lifting that up. You know, the challenges of facing discrimination or suspicion, right? Either in those first years of that immigration period, or, you know, as the politics of the 30s and 40s played out. Yeah,
Yeah.
very good. Anything else on this, Keith?
No, I don't. If you go to the next one. Again, these were a family that I knew, the All family. They were in Jefferson Park. Um, they actually owned like a two flat, and at one time, my grandparents lived like in a lower, in a flat there. And Dave All, which I believe is this young man in the checkered shirt, talked about, how he helped tear out the old coal furnace in the building when they converted it to gas and stuff. So, again, families kind of worked together and helped each other. I don't have anything more on this slide if you want to go. The Kemp family, again, this was a family I knew through the HSGR, and I believe actually one of Gene's grandparents was at Kemp. So this family was more from the Maywood, Bellwood, area on the southwest side of Chicago. These two slides, this slide here was actually from the south, the Maywood, Bellwood area. But it seemed like it was early on almost a tradition that they would take a photograph to send back to the families in Russia. And I think if you look real close at the writing there, a lot of the people in this photograph were associated with the Brotherhood. Probably accounts for all the grays and black outfits they had.
Mm-hmm. And I'm kind of leaning in to get a better look with my bad glasses here.
Yeah.
Am I seeing this correctly, that the deceased is being shown through a panel that's pulled back?
Yes.
Yeah.
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 I remember my grandparents talking about taking photographs, even at Eden Church, of the coffin and the person in it to send back. I just reminded me, you talked about whether there were a tug back to the old country. Even as late as the 1950s, my grandfather wanted to go back and visit. And one of the people at Eden Church, Adolph Dubs, was in the Foreign Service. He was eventually an ambassador. But he talked to him about going back. And I guess Adolph told him, I can get you back in. I can get you a visa to get back into Russia, but I can't guarantee that you'll get out. Because he goes, the Russians have a long memory, and you were in the service, you left, I can't guarantee that you'll get out. So he never went back. But I did.
And you've been there once or more than once?
Just once. In 2016, I took went on a tour that was organized by through the AHSGR and Professor Brent May. So I spent almost 2 weeks over there. Wonderful time for me, anyway.
I
So
think
going on to the next slide.
that might be session 3 to be scheduled.
Well, I could do that. And again, another funeral. This one's got some names on it.
And so those might have Eden connections or just broader neighborhood connections.
I don't know. This was the father of Fred Zeitler.
Mhm.
Anyway, I just put it there as kind of a interesting, at least I don't think of going to a funeral and taking, pictures like that.
Right, right.
But there's also a more, I call it lively side of the Volga Germans. This is the athletic club. This was I believe, a baseball team. Through Jefferson Park. Okay, I went to Jefferson Park a lot. When I showed this to my dad, he goes, "Oh, this guy, he was a great baseball player, and this guy, he probably knew them all, but he was not in there." But if you look at it, if you look at the names, Zeitler, Hoppy, Schweigert, Hoppy, Christ.
And I see Reeb and
Yeah,
DeGraff. Those are, many, many strands of folks, both in our congregation and at Calvary.
yeah.
And then it says at that photo credit, Lydia DeGraff, Jesse. Yeah,
I'm sorry.
I was looking at the photo credit, Lydia DeGraff, Jesse. And I was just thinking that Lydia DeGraff, maybe the same person or not, is a name that I know. In fact, I think maybe she passed in 2014 or 2015.
Yes, I don't know exactly. I might have been a little earlier, but she was associated with the neighborhood. She grew up in the neighborhood. And her maiden name was DeGraff. And her married name was Jessie. So yeah, and there were a number of band organizations. This one happened to be the Volga Deutschen Band. This band actually participated in the 1933 World's Fair in Chicago. They were part of, I believe, the ending parade that they have. I believe they marched in that parade. But if you look at the names on here, number 21, Fred Schnarr, that's Gene Schnarr's father. There's a couple other people that I know families of, but so they had some fun also.
Well, this is an important part of a community's resilience, right?
Yeah.
Health and pleasure, enjoyment, socializing.
Yep. And this was a photo from my my Volga trip to the Volga River in Russia. Jackie, I know you have a map of the village of Schwab. This was a Weigel house. I don't know if it was my Weigels or another, extended family. But according to the map, this was one of their houses. There were a number. When I went in 2016, there was approximately 1,000 people living in the village of Schwab. I would say about half the houses were abandoned like this. But I exploring the other villages in this, a lot of them just are vacant like this. I
And
found it kind of interesting.
of those 1,000 people or so living there when you visited, would you guess that most or all of them were descendants of the immigration, or less than that?
To my knowledge, there were no Germans living in the village of Strait.
Yeah, yeah,
They were all Russians.
yeah.
There was one village that we visited, I believe it was Blumenthal, that there were some actual descendants of German families living in the village.
Mhm.
But most of the villages, there were no German families. The deportation of 1941, they essentially, the army went into the village and said, you got X amount of time to gather whatever you want. We're removing you from the village for your safety. And basically they loaded them on trains and took them to Siberia or the stands, Kazakhstan, that area. Very few went back. Jerry, can you add to that? Jerry also visited a couple years
I'm
after.
out. Yeah, I'm out here. I think you're talking to me.
Yeah,
Yeah.
please.
Yes.
I was just wondering if you could add anything to when you visited, were there any Germans in the villages that you visited?
No, there were not. I was there in 2018 with Brent Mai also. And as far as I know, there were no Germans left in any of the villages that I'm aware of.
Yeah. No, they ceased to exist.
It's just such a humbling and sobering fact, right? That
Yep.
you could say the impermanence of, everything, but then, the particular painful circumstances that lead to people needing to part. And yeah, I just want to speak to the
Yeah, no,
sadness of that.
absolutely. All right. Well, I think I'll end, or this is the end of my presentation. But I wanted to give some thanks to the people that helped me gather this information and told me stories. George Velko, who is from the neighborhood, he's written several books, mostly about his families. Several of the photographs I got from his books, especially the ones from Calvary, came from his book. Eden, I delight in going through the anniversary booklets that you have. The 50th anniversary one, I looked through, and almost every picture, every page, there's a reference to somebody I'm in my family, my extended family. George and Shirley Dorn. George, I got a lot of information about the Brotherhood from George. Always the Weagle family archives. I've collected a lot of photos over the years. My dad, I've got books and books of photos that my dad left. And I really can't emphasize enough. When I started attending meetings at the local chapter, I didn't know much about the German Russians, but I am just amazed at the stories and the welcome I got when I went to the meeting. First meeting is, I know your dad. I went to school with your aunt, and I really got the sense of how close the whole community was. So, any questions? Any thoughts? Yeah, there we are.
Well, I appreciate just the way you wrapped that together. I felt, pastorally, I'll say it sounded almost like a benediction. The mindfulness, again, at the close of the hour of the closeness,
Right.
the closeness of those ties. Yeah, we do have some flexibility here. If Keith is flexible, can spend, I can keep the call open for at least another 5 or 10 minutes if there's discussion or any additional questions.
I know my father, who was Austrian, had great interest in the German Russians, and in Des Plaines, Illinois, they used to meet at a UCC church there. And my wife and I attended a couple Broda dinners,
Yeah.
which was really, I would say, another word for really bad beef, with good vegetables on the side.
Yeah.
But that must have been something I don't remember from Eden, but apparently that was a very common way of using beef and having communal dinners at points.
Yeah. The Broda dinners. I never, growing up, I never called it that. I always called it pot roast. But they would bake a piece of beef with vegetables, and it was, in a big roasting pan, and they would, it would be baked in the oven, roasted.
That's totally how I grew up, like making pot roast. I didn't know there was any other way. And I also didn't know it was called Broda. So I don't know, maybe this is a new chapter in my personal genealogy inquiry.
It's multinational.
There you go. There you
Use
go.
a piece of beef.
But before I joined the Northern Illinois chapter, they would have Broda dinners where they would, and I don't know if it was associated through that chapter, but they had, dinners where they'd make up pans of this and then serve it as a dish. The only things that I remember growing up, as far as food, was the Gotchi's Killer, the German sausage, Grubble.
Oh yeah.
Grubble and pink cookies. What's it? Can't think of it.
Ammonia.
Ammonia cookies. Yeah. They're made with, the leavening agent is an ammonia based product. And when I make them, I put enough peppermint in there so you can't smell it. and of course, chicken noodle.
I mean, ammonia is a bad thing to cook with.
Well, it's actually, if you go back into German history, the ingredient was from the inside of deer antlers.
Oh.
And that was
folk medicine in cooking.
Yeah, and that was, I can't pronounce it in German, but that has its origins. It's where that product came from. And it's a leavening agent that's used in a lot of East European countries.
Did the German Russians ever eat? I remember it as being called taxi waxy, but it's bone marrow. You would hollow out the bones and you'd eat the marrow of it.
Well, I don't know. I do know that they would eat just about anything. My dad, they talked about having beef heart, and beef liver because that was cheap. And when they were growing up, they didn't have a lot to spare.
Yeah, good old world values in every hemisphere. Making sure nothing is wasted.
Yeah. Go ahead.
No, I was just gonna call attention to Jerry and Judy there with us. I don't think I've had the pleasure of meeting you in the past, but I'm glad to hear a little bit from you today. And if there's anything else that you would want to contribute to the conversation or ask about, Be glad to hear from you.
But the only thing I know is we travel a lot, and we're RVers, so we're all over. We're gonna be in Volga, Southwest, near Lake Zurich, Palatine, Barrington, for the next month. And I grew up in Jefferson Park. I actually have my cradle certificate from Eden's, my baptismal certificate.
Wonderful.
And I even have my father's baptismal certificate from there.
Huh.
My parents got married there, so I do have a connection. Yeah, and my parents own the store on Argyle Street, Argyle and LeClaire. It's where I grew up. Well, I didn't. We moved out of the city in about 1950. But anyway, I do have some old photos and stuff. I think my aunt was actually the organist in the church for a while. So it goes way back.
Yeah, and your aunt's name would have been
Funk, Funk.
okay.
That's my father. My mother was a Weagle. So when I was a kid there, I was born in 1943. All of my relatives lived within probably 3 blocks of the church and the school there and everything.
Yeah.
My whole world was there.
Yeah.
So once in a great while we drive through there and whatever.
Yeah.
So it is interesting very much. And I do some genealogy, so I have found some relatives living, a number of them in Germany, and just very recently I found one who was in Ukraine, but she moved back to Russia. So she's living in Krasnodar, Russia right now, and I do contact her through WhatsApp and email. So it is interesting, very interesting.
That is interesting. Well, I'm so delighted that you joined us today. Thank you. Thank you for bringing your listening and sharing presence. And I think I'd like to just wrap up with a super brief reflection, not even long enough to be called a reflection, don't worry, and some invitations and announcements. You know, I said this a bit at the outset of last week's session. I feel the creative stirrings, and I'll call it God, of wanting to continue to do in this place called Eden and our surrounding circles of influence, to do something that I don't see many others doing in today's world, which is really intentional, blessing, honoring, thinking of the past, being desirous to learn about the past. And at the same time, be the kind of people who understand and adapt to the needs of the day, to grow and change in ways that are beneficial, as a way of honoring the generations who came before us, and not, kind of being in this false dichotomy of resentment or breaking of ties. So, I don't know all of what that continues to look like, but I've been very excited that in our kind of small programmatic stamp way, we're really trying to reflect those goals in how we undertake the celebration of our 110th year. And so during this month, I want to thank you, Keith, for being willing to experiment with me and create these recordings and valuable conversations. It was with great intention that we planned these history conversations for this anniversary month. And then upcoming, and this is a very good snapshot of the complex people we're trying to be. On Friday night at 8:00, there is a sound healing meditation, gongs and cymbals and drums and waterfall sounds in the Blessed Sanctuary. We've been doing it for a couple of years, and I think our president said with gentleness the first time we did it, oh, maybe some Volga Germans are turning in their graves, right? And in our open-hearted, open housey way on Saturday afternoon. We'll have neighbor kids and church kids playing in the gym and rec room, enjoying the space, and Eden game day. Coffee house open mic on Saturday night at 5 with poetry and song and coffee and candlelight. And then on Sunday morning, a good mix of amazing reverent organ and piano, maybe with some gospel flair, and Jim playing the guitar, with the honorable, contribution for the day. Will the circle be unbroken?
Yeah,
And
circle be
so,
unbroken.
just on behalf of the Eden community, I want to thank you, Keith, for setting the tone by doing this visibly. And I'm excited to see where it will go, as we draw to us conversations that learn from the past.
I got one question for Keith. Does he
Mm.
remember the dart ball league that Eden Church used to have?
I don't, but my grandfather was involved with that. Yeah,
I remember watching him play. That was looked like a lot of fun.
yeah. And I know that hidden away in one of the cabinets there's a trophy that he won in that league.
Yeah.
I had a quick question for you, Jim. You mentioned Reamers.
Yes,
Do you know Don Reamer?
I know the name. My wife would probably know the name more than me.
Okay, because again, for Jerry, his grandfather, I think, was a Wego. They lived down on Gunnison, just on the other side of Laverne.
Oh, I know that block because my wife's grandfather, Adam Cook, and his family lived down there for a
Okay.
while on that block. And I know there was a Christ right across the street, a Calvary Christ right across the street from Calvary Church,
Yeah,
that corner.
yeah,
Keith, is Don the colleague who became a minister?
yes,
Yeah.
yes.
He had attended a few Eden Zoom meetings, worship services,
Ah,
early in the pandemic. But I haven't spoken to him for quite some time.
okay. Yeah, he was he became a minister.
Yeah.
But again, Jerry's related through the Wegels, the Reamers. There was a Wegel in his family. As one of the old timers said, if you were from Schwede, you were related somehow.
That's beautiful. Well, maybe we remember that we are related. And
Yep.
if I or the church community can do anything for any of you at any time, please call upon us. Until then, know that we extend our goodwill and look forward to staying in touch. Thanks
All
again,
right.
everybody.
Thank you, everybody. Appreciate it.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you.